do you want to talk about arousal and desire separately and kind of walk through that? Sometimes I find this helpful, Sharon, with other podcast guests where we do actual case studies. So I can make some up, but you can feel free to adjust them and say, okay, so a 35-year-old mother of two, married, comes into your office and says, I love my partner. I just don't want to have sex. Like, I'm just not in the mood. And so tell me, what's your workup? How do you, that's basically all she says on presentation. Let's just pretend that the kids are old enough now that she's not like sleep deprived, waking up every 10 minutes. So her kids are, 10 and 12 or something like that. And
let's make her 39 if her kids are 10 and
okay,
12.
perfect. So she's 39, her kids are 10 and 12.
Or 41.
Okay,
right?
fair enough.
Things may be starting to change.
Yeah, perfect. So the point is,
I have reasons for that.
Yeah, she's premenopausal is the point I'm really just trying to get at.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, and that's it. So this.
And she doesn't have tiny kids waking her up.
That's right. Yeah. So she's out of the difficulties of child rearing. Okay, so what do we want? How do you want to work her up, and how?
So let me just give you the categories and tell you how I would think about her.
Okay.
Right. So I don't know who of you've seen Masters of Sex, right? So the whole concept or how to organize sexual dysfunction was based on the work really first of Masters and Johnson, right? That there was a response cycle that had an order, right? And their work primarily they looked at both men and women. They were actually really quite progressive. And the idea was that people started with getting aroused, right? And I think in their concept, it was all physiologic because they mostly just looked at physiologic parameters, although they understood the psychology of things to some extent. That there was this idea that people get physically and mentally excited. They reach some sort of escalation and maybe even a peak or a plateau. And that can be variable, and there's some models that for women, there's more variability in plateaus. And then the classic response cycle is it results in an orgasm, climax, peak, lots of different words get used, but we're just going to use the word orgasm, keep it simple. And that there's different patterns for that too, right? Like, so, and different ways
can I ask a
have
question before that?
Sure.
That goes before that. So, what comes first, desire or arousal? Desire comes first, does it? Or do you have to have some arousal to then trigger desire?
I'm going to talk about desire in a moment because that's an interesting question. So, but in their model, they kept it simple. Okay. You engaged in sex and you got aroused. And so maybe they thought like the interest in having sex was about being turned on or being aroused. They didn't really get distinguished about it, right? And then you have an orgasm. And for women, like there's different patterns. It could happen in different ways with clitoral stimulation, vaginal stimulation, et cetera. And sometimes multiple orgasms, which is more characteristic for the variability in women. And then there's this idea of the like refractory or resolution phase. And that's kind of for like many decades since their work in the late 50s, early 60s. That's how people have organized their thinking. A few people came along, notably Helen Singer Kaplan in the 70s. And she happened to be a psychologist at Cornell and has like a whole discipline and following, some of which are my colleagues still, there are a few around. And added this idea of wanting or desire and felt that it was really distinct, like thinking about it, anticipating, willingness to engage, and that if you didn't separate it, you were missing something about what could be a problem for someone. So that 35-year-old or that 39-year-old we're talking about.
I think she's 41 now, but yeah.
No, we made her fool because her kids were 10. I wasn't letting her have kids at 25, but
okay,
right?
Good point.
Her kids, if you said they were 10 and 12, I was just trying to be realistic. The other thing is I feel like it comes up in that like if it's not late reproductive postmenopausal, it's like 38 to 41. I don't know why, but I hear that a lot. There's sort of time frames that come up. We can talk about why that one is, but that's why I picked it. But she might say to me like, I'm exhausted. I have these kids, I have this job, but I agree. And I'm like, and I'm always kind of like, it's still even to this day surprised to hear, but I said, do you get turned on? Well, yeah, I mean, I feels fine. Do you have an orgasm? Oh, yeah. And is it satisfying? Yeah, but I don't want sex. So if you get rid of the idea that desire is separate, you miss that, right?
Yep.
And I think, there's a lot of variation on that. We could talk about a different patient where they say like, theoretically, I really want to be with this person, but I know that like things aren't going to work. I'm not going to feel anything. I'm not going to get wet. I'm going to have pain. So that like then I avoid, right? And then I don't want because of that reason. Like there's variations on that. So it's really helpful to keep these concepts separate, right?
Yes.
There's some work coming out. I don't know if you want to get into this. It's come out over the last decade, actually, in some sort of lay press books that are smushing them together, saying that they're indistinguishable for women. But I feel they shouldn't be. I feel they need to be separated. And that's based on, first of all, vast clinical experience that you need to walk people through this to understand the problem by separating them. Secondly, that the available treatments target different things. And the physiologic plausibility for separation is strong in terms of risk factor and response to treatment intervention and the opportunity for future direction in improving sexual function. If we keep them together, we're going to lose that.
Yeah.
And to get very granular about this, the psychiatric compendiums has now combined them, desire and arousal, as one thing called female sexual interest and arousal disorder, whereas the sexual medicine societies have put out strong position statements as well as nomenclature papers suggesting that we have to have these categories be separate. And the upcoming ICD, or the International Classification of Diseases, is going to maintain separate coding for desire and arousal for both men and women.
And yet you're saying that the DSM combines them?
It's the DSM-5, which came out, now it's almost 10 years ago, interestingly. They just put out a revision, which I worked on actually as a medical reviewer. They insisted on keeping it the same. They told me that at the onset. You can review this, but we're not separating them. If you look, and they wanted me to look at sort of the medical piece of this. Again, it's based on the idea, and I think this is fair for the kinds of people that show up in psychological and psychiatric offices, that for women it often is interchangeable, right? Like it can be. It is still separate for men. And I'll give you an example. There's the work, do you want to digress for this for a moment? Because it's interesting.
Sure.
I think it resonates for people. And then we'll come back to how we would evaluate your 39-year-old, I think, or 41, whatever she is now. So Rosemary Basson is the mother of this model. And there have been others that have written about this in primarily the professional literature, but there's some books out right now, some lay press books about this. And the idea is that instead of this linear response cycle, that a better model for many women or for some women is something more circular. It's called the circular incentive model. And it's the idea that what drives sexual response isn't linear. Women go, I want to have desire. I want sex. I'm going to go find my partner. I'm going to initiate or I'm going to receive, and then I'm going to be turned on, and then I'm going to have an orgasm. It's going to be great. And that when you say that to people, lots of people are going to say that, like, I must be abnormal because I don't feel that way. And that their normal is more something like this. Like they're not particularly feeling spontaneous sexual desire, but the circle starts with the motivation and the incentive to be close, right? To drive toward intimacy. They're mostly neutral, but because they are close to their partner, or even, we should make sure we understand that sex with oneself fits in here too. They want to feel the benefits that come from a sexual encounter with either a partner or oneself, and they're receptive or seek the stimuli, but not because they're feeling like sex hunger, right? The classic desire, but because of that motivation. And if everything's intact, psychological and biological influences that govern arousability are intact, they're going to have all of that arousal. Their brain's going to turn on, their body, your heart rate's going to go up. You're going to feel your nipples become erect. You're going to feel the genital sensations, and that will trigger engagement or arousal. That'll make you feel more invested, and then more desire, and then more arousal, and that will lead to satisfaction and maybe an orgasm.
Right. So that's a chain reaction there, sort of.
Right.
Yep.
It's modeled as a circle.
Yep.
But it's the idea that satisfaction, knowing it's good, knowing you're going to feel close. I one of my favorite expressions from one of my own longstanding patients is the afterglow is what motivates it. Right. How you feel together with how she feels connected. How not just herself good, but in the relationship. And that if you don't normalize that thing where desire and arousal kind of smushed together, when everything works, you're gonna make people think there's something wrong with them, that they don't have spontaneous sexual desire. So there's a book out there, for example, Emily Nagosu wrote a book called Come As You Are. And some of the work of Lori Brotto, these are lay press books, looks at this, that we want to make it okay that you can be motivated by other reasons, but where this model gets confusing is that it doesn't normalize low sexual desire where you can't make it work.